And that operation, conducted deep within Russia, took out, I believe, 20 aircraft, probably 10 of them totally destroyed. But it was more important than that. Russia claims it has large fleets of bomber aircraft and airborne early warning. But the fact remains is that they don't have that many spares. They have a lot of unserviceable aircraft that they call the Christmas tree. They take off parts to keep the serviceable aircraft going. So the very fact that Russia had moved a lot of their aircraft to the rear, and the aircraft that Ukraine attacked almost certainly were the very few that were fully serviceable. And I know from the UK, we saw a marked drop-off in Russian air activity threatening our coastline in the ensuing weeks and months. So that was a very, very capable attack. It would have caused Russia to think twice, and I think it was a really good example of Ukrainian ingenuity, bravery and creativity. Fantastic attack.
Sean Bell is a retired Royal Air Force pilot and Sky News military analyst. Welcome to our program, Sean.
Daniel, it's always a pleasure to join you for your program.
I would like to sum up with you main developments of the year in the war in Ukraine, and let's cover Ukrainian daring special operation. So this year we had Spiderweb operation. Recently, Ukrainian underwater drones struck Russian submarine in Novorossiysk, penetrated Russia's naval defenses. Also, for the first time, Ukrainian drones have targeted Russia's oil tanker in the Mediterranean. So this is more than 1,200 miles from Ukraine. What is your highlight of this year in the matter of Ukrainian deep strikes, special operations with drones and such tactical achievements?
Yeah, Daniel, it's been a fascinating year. I mean, I end the year not exactly optimistic, but Ukraine has demonstrated some amazing capabilities over this past year. Some of them will be irritating to Russia. Things like the Kilo-class submarine. Will that affect its ability to wage war? No, but is it a fantastic example of what Ukraine has been able to do? I think the key one for me strategically is the ability to attack the energy infrastructure. You know, there's a lot of it. Russia's a big country, and with Ukraine developing its own weapons to be able to go a long way into Russia, Flamingo missile, I think you're trying to produce 200 of those a year, very capable missile, and that has definitely hurt Russia. But for me, the highlight has to be Spiderweb. I think the attack against the Russian air, I'm a former pilot. I think one of the big things about this war is that Russia has not been able to gain control of the air. And any war, if you control the air, you make life very difficult for land forces because they come under attack not only from the land, but also from the air. But Russia's not been able to do that, despite the fact it's got a lot of very, very capable aircraft. And that operation, conducted deep within Russia, took out, I believe, 20 aircraft, probably 10 of them totally destroyed. But it was more important than that. Russia claims it has large fleets of bomber aircraft and airborne early warning. But the fact remains is that they don't have that many spares. They have a lot of unserviceable aircraft that they call the Christmas tree. They take off parts to keep the serviceable aircraft going. So the very fact that Russia had moved a lot of their aircraft to the rear, and the aircraft that Ukraine attacked almost certainly were the very few that were fully serviceable. And I know from the UK, we saw a marked drop-off in Russian air activity threatening our coastline in the ensuing weeks and months. So that was a very, very capable attack. It would have caused Russia to think twice, and I think it was a really good example of Ukrainian ingenuity, bravery and creativity. Fantastic attack.
Let's also cover this attack on submarine, because British military intelligence has confirmed the damage caused to this Kilo-class submarine Varshavenka based is in Novorossiysk, Russia's main naval hub in the Black Sea. How did Ukrainian drones manage to penetrate Russian defenses, and how can you assess the post-attack reaction of the Russian side? They just sunk several barges inside their port, right, and blocked their own fleet from leaving this port.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think will submarines play a key role in the war in Ukraine? Probably not. There was an opportunity to target merchant shipping that was taking some of your grain into the export markets, but that's very difficult for them to do. And the fact that Ukraine was able to use a very clever technology underwater drone to get past the normal defenses underwater and target a Russian submarine. And quite frankly, these submarines take years to build. It's not just about the money, it's about how long they take to build. And you take out one of those, it's a significant damage to the Russians. I think one of the things that has impressed me is that the West, when the war first started, emptied its stockpiles of weapons to give Ukraine help, but they didn't go very far. And what you then need to do is to get your defense industrial base spun up so that it can provide the weapons of war. There's a saying in the UK, soldiers win battles, but nations win wars. And that's because you need to get your defense industrial base up and running. Russia is spending, I think it's 7% now of GDP, nearly 40% of all spending on defense, and it is producing and buying in a lot of the weapons it needs. Ukraine doesn't have that economy. Your economy is a tenth of the size of Russia. We can't produce the weapons. It would take too long to test them, to evaluate them, to do safety cases. But by sending Ukraine technology, support and assistance, and Ukraine has some very clever people who are building some of these drones and then just testing them at war. They don't worry. They don't have to do a big testing program. You can just send them up and see how they work. And I think that attack on the Kilo class certainly got Russia, caught them by surprise, and will have undoubtedly made them worry more about defending their own assets as well as attacking Ukraine.
And another operation, we just have to discuss this recent assassination of another top Russian general in the heart of Moscow. Russian General Vanil Savratov, head of the Russian Armed Forces General Staff Training Division, was killed Monday by car bomb in Moscow. This device detonated around 7 a.m. when he was trying to leave the car parking. And Sky News just recently assessed the timing of these assassinations, right? In the middle of US-led negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. How can you assess this probably Ukrainian operation and the timing of this assassination? Is this another message to US administration that Ukraine still is in fight?
Yeah, there's lots of issues there, isn't there, Daniel? I think, first of all, I don't think Ukraine's claimed responsibility for the assassination, but honestly, it doesn't. There are not too many people out there, countries out there, that will be able to do this. It will undoubtedly have caused some pain, but Russians got a lot of generals for the time being. I think more importantly, it was done on the streets of Moscow, and I think anything that brings the war to the Muscovites, I think, is very important. At the moment, it feels that apart from they can't buy a McDonald's in the middle of Moscow, and it appears to be some fuel and diesel shortages, most people in Moscow probably don't really spend much time worrying about the war. When you have a car bomb explodes in your city, that catches your attention, and I think therefore that's really, really important. The timing, I think, is fascinating, only because we've had President Trump in office for a year now, and every day almost, I mean, it's certainly every week, he says that negotiations are progressing, they've made great leaps forward. But MI6, our own military intelligence services here in the UK, said there's no evidence whatsoever that President Putin is even close to considering negotiations. And that is matched by Russia's actions. It is continuing the war. I note that last night, Russia launched, I think it was 650 drones, 20 missiles at Ukraine, long-range missiles, a number of people killed, targeting the energy infrastructure. It doesn't look likely. That's not the actions of a Russia that's ready to stop fighting anytime soon. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the negotiations. Of course they have to happen, but bluntly, I think most people who have any background in this at all believe that Putin will only stop once he's achieved his military objectives, or if he's forced to stop, and whether that's economically or militarily. Economically, your attacks on the energy infrastructure are great, but militarily, we need to see Tomahawk missiles being given to Ukraine. We need to see a no-fly zone implemented across some of Ukraine, and we need to see Western countries, particularly Europe, stepping up their military industrial base to start providing some real military impact on the battlefield.
Let's cover the most recent US offer to end the war in Ukraine. Under this US offer, Ukrainian troops would withdraw from the Donbass, Russians would stay in place, Ukraine would receive this Article 5-like security guarantee, would join European Union, would be provided with funds for reconstruction. What is your honest assessment of this US offer? Should Ukraine take it?
Well, the trouble is, Daniel, first of all, I would say that it doesn't matter what I think. This is a Ukrainian war, and it is for Ukrainians to decide what they want. What I would say is that I have been somewhat dismayed by the initial 28-point peace plan put forward by President Trump, because as a military guy, it looked like surrender. It looked like giving up territory, stopping growing the size of your military, and not being able to have any Western forces on your soil. Well, that looks a lot like surrender to me. Now, since that time, Europe has stepped up and managed to persuade America to try to be a little bit more careful with its language. I think the war will have to be brought to an end. I mean, let's face it, we are very shortly going to approach the fifth anniversary of the war. And at the moment, it doesn't look likely that Russia is ready to stop anytime soon. So there will need to be some form of negotiation. I expect territory will be part of that conversation. But I think the most important thing, and I think we're seeing that in President Zelensky's regular narratives, is about that post-conflict security guarantees, because an Article 5, what does that mean? A little scribble on a sheet of paper will not be enough. I know we've spoken before about the Budapest Memo of 1994. Ukraine was guaranteed its sovereignty if it gave up nuclear weapons. 20 years later, President Putin ripped up that bit of paper and moved into Crimea, and 8 years later moved into the Donbass. So I don't think President Zelensky is going to accept any signature on a bit of paper. It will have to be backed up. I don't think NATO will be ready to provide that security guarantee, but I do think there are a lot of European countries that it is in their interest for Ukraine to survive. It's in their interest for Ukraine to grow, have a prosperity, be self-governing, and therefore I think there is huge opportunity for some form of tangible security guarantee with forces in Ukraine. But bluntly, even that, until President Putin is ready to sit down and negotiate, it doesn't matter what we think. The priority has to be fighting the war.
Is this Article 5-like promise from President Trump worth withdrawing our own troops from the Donbass?
I think the difficulty about territory, Daniel, and I understand why you asked me the question, but it's incredibly difficult for a British former military guy to start to answer that sort of question, particularly when I'm talking to Ukrainians, when I know a year ago when I first came out to Ukraine, there was this sense that we will kick Russia out. We're not going to give up. This is a 300-year war. We have to survive. My most recent visit back, I think I felt Ukrainians were getting weary of the war and looking to how do you bring the war to an end. And I do think there are examples. Finland in the Winter War, they ceded about 20% of their territory, but went on to be a very strong, independent, powerful, sovereign nation. It is not for me to decide, but I wouldn't be at all surprised is that at the moment, Russia is gradually taking territory. It's slow. Ukraine is making Russia pay for every step they take. And most people in the West believe it'll be 2 years at least before they were able to take the rest of the Donbass. But at the moment, it's difficult to see how Ukraine can stop them. And with America support appearing to be a bit more fragile, unless Europe steps up, unless there's some major significant changes to the way that Europe supports Ukraine, I think it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine to withstand the next couple of years of Russian onslaught.
And also US pressure on President Zelensky. From your perspective, would President Zelensky be able to withstand pressure from President Trump because he can hold military shipments, he can hold intelligence sharing with Ukraine? Does President Zelensky have enough room for these negotiations?
That is a great question, and I think we saw talks over the last week in Berlin with America sounding very positive again, but as a military analyst, President Putin was not involved, and those talks felt to me more about keeping America engaged in the process than actually finding a resolution, because frankly, until President Putin is around the table, that's not going to happen. I think the President Trump said he was going to solve this war in a day when he came into power. A year later, it's pretty clear he's not able to solve it. He is trying to put pressure onto President Zelensky because the war would come to an end. If Ukraine was to surrender, then President Putin, the war would come to an end tomorrow, and therefore President Trump might look good for the next 2 or 3 years. But that is not solving the problem. And the danger that you know only too well, and me as a military analyst know full well, that Russia will come again. This isn't something they're going to pause and be happy. They are going to come again. And therefore, there has to be something more robust. President Trump doesn't seem to appreciate that. European leaders do. And therefore, how do we keep America engaged, but actually Europe step up and start to take over when America is providing less military support now, but it's military support that is vital to the survival of Ukraine.
President Zelensky says that US and Ukraine negotiators have made significant progress in this matter of security guarantees for Ukraine. Do you feel that US would commit providing air power to such mission inside Ukraine in case of Ukraine accepting Article 5-like security guarantee?
Well, it's very difficult to get inside President Trump's mind, but what I can read is America's actions, not its words. America is withdrawing troops from Europe. It is focusing on China. It has been very clear that Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and therefore, but it is on the European continent, and therefore it's a European problem to solve. And I think one of the things we're seeing, Daniel, is a profound history books will be written about this, that for the last 80 years, Europe's security largely has rested on NATO, a US-led NATO that has prevailed. By the end of the Cold War, 35 years ago, most Western nations reduced their defense budgets significantly. America kept theirs much the same. And that created friction between America and Europe. All of a sudden now, I mean, the first time Trump was in power, he said we've got to increase defense spending. 2/3 of NATO were not doing that. When he came back into power for his second term, still Europe was not spending that money. I think what we're seeing is a concerted effort by President Trump to look at Europe and say, Europe, you've got to step up. You can't rely on America being the big brother and fighting these battles on your behalf. We are focused on China. Europe, you need to be focused on Ukraine. And that's a massive wake-up call at the moment, because no European country has got spare money, but they are more and more determined to see what they can do to increase the level of support required for Ukraine, because that is what's needed to bring this war to an end.
Overnight, Ukrainian air forces have intercepted most of Russia's missiles flying inside Ukraine, and they mostly used the US-made F-16 fighter jets. So pilots in Ukraine's F-16 fighter jets, according to the most recent information, have managed to intercept most of Russian missiles fired at Ukrainian targets. So even more missiles were intercepted by F-16, but not by the ground launchers. What is your assessment of this another tendency?
The F-16 is a very capable aircraft, and I'm delighted to see the Ukrainians use it. But when I spoke to pilots in Ukraine when I was last there, they're very frustrated because the F-16 has a lot of potential, but it needs to be used in the way that it was designed. Western air power, we have independent air forces. Ukraine, you have an air force that's part of the army and therefore largely provides airborne artillery. Getting those F-16s to be used as effectively as they can be. Now, shooting down cruise missiles is not a bad way to use an F-16. It's got a great radar. The challenge, of course, is that you need to use missiles, either heat-seeking or radar missiles, to shoot those down. Those missiles are very expensive, and you don't have many of them. So whilst, yes, it's a very effective way of targeting and shooting those missiles out of the sky, to my knowledge, you have a limited supply of those air-to-air missiles, and therefore you'll need to get more of those, and quickly, if that's the way you're going to be shooting down those very capable, very dangerous cruise missiles.
And really most final question for you for the next year, your prediction. What is your feeling about the end of this war? How close are we to a deal probably next year? Do you feel that we are moving forward to a peaceful settlement, or at least temporarily ceasefire on the ground?
The short answer is no. And one of the reasons I believe that is because there's no sign that President Putin wants to stop. If I was an advisor to President Putin at the moment, a military advisor, I'd tell him to keep going. He is watching NATO fall slightly, cracks appear. He's watching America interests move away. He's watching Europe flounder, working out what to do. And on the battlefield, he is moving forward and therefore seems to be en route to achieving his objectives, however long it takes him. I do think the West has the ability to put a lot more pressure on President Putin. I said, if we could get Tomahawk missiles into your hands, I think that would make life a lot easier for you targeting Russian energy infrastructure. And if more work could be done there, I think that funds the war and would make life a lot more difficult for President Putin. I also think that more sanctions and a no-fly zone, I do hope that Europe steps up more and starts to stand proud and force Putin's hand, because if it doesn't, I think there could be another very difficult year ahead for Ukraine.
And also for Russia, just the final point, recently, we didn't discuss this, but Russian oil prices have fallen to their lowest levels since 2022 to just $40 a barrel. Do you feel that this would be sustainable for Russia to just move forward despite all economic pressure, because this is high price for Russian people for this war?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And that's what I mean about economic pressure. If you look at the Russian economy, there's a lot more money going out than coming in at the moment. And when you rely on a high price for oil, and they're not getting that because China and India, the main people buying that oil, are able to do a very good deal, drive the prices down a lot. But I do think still, you've still got a lot of money flowing into the Russian coffers funding this war, and it will take a major shift in order for economically President Putin to call a halt to the war. I think far more likely is doing those long-range attacks, but also Europe standing proud and saying enough is enough. That's far enough, Putin. The war has to stop now. Give Putin an off-ramp, and then maybe there's a chance of a negotiated settlement. But I would say, as we approach the Christmas period here in the UK, the one thing I've always been impressed by is the amazing resilience of Ukrainians. Each time I've visited, there's a spirit, a courage, a tenacity that I'm absolutely proud of. And whatever happens in the future, I'm very confident Ukraine in some form will survive and will grow to be a very powerful and proud nation, and will look back at this dreadful chapter of its life, but will look back and know that they were the foundations of the strong Ukraine that I'm convinced Ukraine will be again.
Thank you, Sean, for your kind words and insightful answers, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.